Hey guys, September 24th, 2025 here with your after hours recap. Okay, so today fairly simple. The market did, what the market's supposed to do, when you kind of take a step back and you look at this incredible run since April, we got 2 days down and, when you just zoom out and you're resting on the 10-day, there's really nothing wrong with that at all. I think that that's fairly constructive for the market. That's the kind of thing that you want to see your market doing. You want to see your market digesting. Now, with that comes some volatility, in particular in the growth space or in stocks that have already made some pretty big extended moves. With that was a name like ALAB over the last few days. There's been some unfilled gaps on the way down, just a subtle little gap down, subtle little gap down, subtle little gap down, and then another one today. And obviously, you got some pickup in selling. So there is an eager seller in there, and you're coming right back into the base where it broke out. And that's just kind of the thing that you see as the market begins to undergo a little bit of distribution. And really, the market looks fine, but we've seen this kind of movie before where the market hardly pulls back and then prior leaders can really unwind quite a bit. I wouldn't even be too surprised to see if Reddit, doesn't reclaim this 20-day, we start to revisit that 220 level fairly quickly as well. So that's just what can happen in this market. Obviously, there is still a bit of euphoria out there. And really, I won't even use euphoria, right? There's just a particular subset of groups, whether it be your data center stocks like your Iron. Today it was Riot as well. Cypher last night and into today. And obviously that sold off just a little bit. Recently, your nuclear stocks, your quantum stocks. And then, let's leave it to the adult in the room, Jim Cramer, to finally say, hey, you know what? Maybe it's time to ring the register. And, how can you blame him for saying something like that? This name has been absolutely vertical. Still completely fine if you're a bull. You're hanging out above the 5-day. I think that's perfectly fine. I actually went ahead and got short IONQ today using that 76 level as my stop. And boy, were we close to that today. And you've unwound a little bit. And then in after hours, obviously, is when Jim said, hey, you know what? Let's ring the register on a few of these. SNDK was the other one that I got short. And I got short this one because, one, we were highly extended from the 50, and two, this one was moving with MU on earnings, and MU, gaps down overnight on what I thought were fairly good earnings, and this name has had fairly good earnings and just gotten maybe a little bit ahead of itself, and then just goes on to digest for a little while, maybe just a little bit of ahead of itself, and then goes on to digest for a while is what is possible there. I also got short Iron, and that one I am still holding. I was kind of using that $50 whole level. Looks like tomorrow, that may get tagged and I might have to get out of there, but really no harm. And I'm also sitting in MSTR on the short side, and I've been in this one since the 200 simple moving average. Really nice to see this one work, under that 320 level. I could see us completely, starting to speed up to sub 300 potentially. And really, Bitcoin was acting well today. And it just goes to show you how weak MSTR is. And really, not all names are weak. China stocks continue to be awesome. BABA with a pretty big gap up overnight. Obviously, a little bit of a topping tail there. I'm sure there was plenty of people with profits to take off the table. No big deal. My PDD continues to work well. I don't really see any issues there. And really, Tesla, we should, not forget to leave out Tesla making a new high here in after hours, 445. So awesome to see. Highest close in the formation. I won't be too surprised if we are making a new all-time high shortly. And I don't want to say that the market is in any kind of trouble here. There isn't some kind of insane long positioning on the market, right? In fact, it's just the opposite. A lot of people are actually short the market, and understandably so. Price has gone up a lot, but price isn't necessarily a reason to be negative. It would be more so on the positioning side, and we're just not quite there. Dollar with a little bit of strength today. And I don't see that being as a great catalyst necessarily for gold and silver. I would suspect that if the dollar, and this did just have a beautiful undercut and rally on 9/17 when there was FOMC last Thursday. If I'm not mistaken, it was on Thursday, and then we are basically at the highest close since that Thursday. If we start to clear the 50-day, does that begin to put a little bit more pressure on gold? Gold being a little bit of a crowded long as well. Everybody has now been focused on gold for some reason, when in reality this thing was good out of this base, and it was really good last year in March, but leave it to the crowd to show up just a touch late to the party, which is typical and completely fine. But anyway, I thought the market for the most part held in there pretty well. But if you're going to own some stocks, individual names that aren't coming out of clean bases, that have already made big moves, something like my CCJ, which I own, pretty nasty down day today. This is the second time this thing is getting a colonoscopy. If we can't really hold the 10-day and we start to lose today's lows tomorrow, it's likely that I end up cutting that one. My SYM, which I trimmed down half yesterday, a little bit lower today, and I really don't have much more of cushion on this thing. It's likely that I end up, probably stopping out of the last of it under today's lows and the 10 simple moving average. MP with a pretty ugly down day today, but ultimately this one's hanging out above the 50. Don't really want to do too much with it. I do just want to let it work so long as we are above the 10, 20, and the 50. And really, you could point to an arc and just say, what's wrong with this chart, right? I don't want to get overly defensive with my longs when they're working, but I do want to make sure that I am being a little bit more cautious on new longs. I put no new longs on today. I did finally let go of CCL. This was just not that great of action. And they've got earnings on Monday. For me, it was just, if you're starting to lose, really it was 919's low, which we did there briefly, and effectively the 50 simple moving average closing underneath that. I wanted to go ahead and cut that position. Been in this thing for a while. Yes, I could have given it a little bit more wiggle room, but effectively since 7-7, it has gone nowhere. And I don't have 2.5 months of patience to watch my money do nothing. I would have rather plowed that extra capital into a Tesla, into an Oklo, into something different, and actually made some money for the last 2.5 months on that capital. So good to kind of be out of that. Obviously, Oklo with the others, a pretty big down day today. I can't make too much of this, right? This move was up a ton, so I'm already down to a quarter of my original position. I see nothing wrong with just letting it work. I was being asked by everybody, what are you doing with it? What are you going to do with it? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to hold it? What are you going to do? Guys, it's down to the 5-day. I don't want to micromanage something, that's not acting terribly wrong. It just is what it is. It's part of the business of holding stocks that have down days. It's not that big a deal. I didn't think Oklo had some exhaustion gap. Normally you get a few overnight gap ups, so I just held it. It's a quarter of the original position. I'm good to just let it work. Outside of that, you did have NBIS being an absolute monster. Very nice to see. Some of these names are continuing higher, but on the flip side of that, you've got BE, and you need to respect risk. Stocks that go absolutely vertical, this is why trimming some into strength, especially when you start to get, multiples over 7 times its average true range from the 50, 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, paying yourself into that is normally a pretty wise idea. If you don't, you catch a 23, 24, 25% move down in just a matter of 3 days. Not something, you really want to have happen with your money. Obviously, if you're in from, 25 or 28 or 30 or something like that, maybe you can have a little bit more patience. It did try to bounce off the 20 simple moving average today. That's very nice. Obviously, a little bit of a gap down from where the close was, about $1.50. And I know that could still be pretty uncomfortable. It's not like there's a super strong bid there. If the market begins to bounce, are some of these names going to carve out a bottom soon? Your Reddit, your BE, it's possible. Do your quantum stocks turn back around and go and have their blow off highs? I don't know. Like I said, I didn't really see an edge in grabbing too many longs today. I thought one long that I missed today, and we talked about it yesterday and we talked about it today in the room, was Futu back over the 50 simple moving average as a 50 SMA undercut and rally. We even talked about it on last night's watch list video. that's great. I think that, this was a potential long today. You did have a really nice pickup in volume back up above the 50 days. So good to see that work. Um, if you kind of looked at LabU, this one was pushing out today as well. Effectively, I want to say the highest close in this formation. So that is really good. Obviously, a little bit of volatility. The Russell, maybe not the best. NQ with a day two pullback. S&P 500 with a day two pullback. So really, you just have to take it one day at a time. You kind of got to use your thinking cap in the morning and say to yourself, is there great risk reward on taking fresh longs here? And then if the answer is yes, okay, what are the setups? If the setups are something that is wildly extended, that's terrible. And so for me, it just became, can I get myself into a couple of these shorts? And that's exactly what I did today with Iron, which is not working so great at the moment. And we'll just kind of hold it for that $50 level potentially tomorrow. And it looks like, I will get tagged out of that one. IONQ, which is working all right. And SNDK, which is working fantastic. And MSTR, which is working really well for the last few days. So my own portfolio, not only am I starting to lose a little bit of traction on the long side with an MP, with a CCJ, with a CCL getting knocked out of that, I'm starting to, and even SYM, just effectively giving back most of those gains, although I did trim some into the strength, which is good. I am starting to gain some traction on the short side. I don't want to marry the short side right now. The market is still in a healthy uptrend. Did I think that there was some opportunity to take advantage of, a quantum name or two, looking like BE for a few days, looking like ALAB, looking like Reddit? Did I think that maybe there's an opportunity to take advantage of, some of these data center names like an Iron or a Cypher? Yeah, I thought that, those could play out pretty decent on the short side. And for the most part, if people got into Riot onto that extension, obviously you had a pretty nasty fail today. If you had gotten yourself into Cypher on yesterday's overnight push for absolutely no reason, you're sitting pretty nicely with it right now. So that's just kind of the environment we're in. You have to put, like I said, your thinking cap on and try to figure out if the best risk reward at the moment, if your best expected value, as Lance would say, is on the short side or on the long side. For me today, that was on the short side. Like I said, I am profiting on 2 out of my 3 shorts very nicely, which is, better than my normal hit rate. 60%, 66% is pretty good hit rate as a swing trader, and I would take that any day of the week. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Like I said, I'm starting to get stopped out of a couple longs, and just one really, but it looks like I may be stopped out of a few more going forward over the next few days. And then, my shorts are starting to pay me, and those are starting to gain a little bit of traction. And again, if you're in a BE, if you're in an ALAB, if you're in a Reddit, that can be kind of tough to stomach some of that pullback. So making sure that you are paying yourself into some of the strength, I think, is the way. And then continuing to be super patient with the names that you believe to be leadership quality. And for me, that one name continues to be, as I've said it, and I've been saying it, is Tesla. I think it's Tesla, and this name just looks absolutely incredible. I see absolutely no reason to leave it. Like I said, highest close in the formation, up about another $3.50 in after hours. I just will not be surprised if we're off to an all-time high sooner rather than later. And even looking at a Tesla kind of gives me optimism that that this is just your normal run-of-the-mill pullback in the market, and this is just one of your leaders in that mega cap space. So yeah, hopefully this video finds you guys well, and I will see you guys all bright and early for pre-market prep, or I will see you guys in the room tomorrow morning. Cheers, guys.